Good leaders don't just inspire people to follow them, they inspire people to think for themselves. And today, I want to challenge the way we think about relationships. See, we often talk about what makes a man strong, his confidence, his success, his ability to provide. But rarely do we talk about his weaknesses, the blind spots that can impact the women in his life. And the truth is, understanding male weakness isn't about judgment, it's about awareness. Because when you understand something, you can navigate it, you can make better decisions, set stronger boundaries, and build healthier connections. So today we're going to talk about the weaknesses every woman must know. Not to criticize, but to empower. Because when you see the pattern, you can change the outcome. And that, my friends, is where real strength begins. From a young age, many men are conditioned to believe that showing emotions is a sign of weakness. Society reinforces the idea that strength is about control, resilience, and keeping emotions in check. As a result, many men grow up suppressing their feelings, believing that vulnerability makes them less capable or less masculine. This emotional avoidance creates a disconnect in their relationships, especially with the women in their lives. When a man struggles to express vulnerability, he often finds it difficult to communicate openly and honestly. Instead of addressing emotions directly, he may withdraw, shut down, or respond with frustration. He might replace emotional conversations with surface-level discussions, avoiding deep topics that make him feel exposed. Over time, this pattern creates communication gaps, leaving his partner feeling unheard, unappreciated, or even disconnected. In relationships, emotional avoidance can manifest in many ways. A man may struggle to acknowledge when he is hurt, choosing instead to mask his feelings with silence or distraction. He might resist discussing conflicts, assuming that ignoring them will make them disappear. In moments of emotional intensity, he may become defensive rather than open, fearing that showing emotion will make him look weak or incapable. This inability to express vulnerability doesn't mean he lacks feelings, it means he doesn't know how to process or communicate them effectively. He may feel love deeply, but struggle to say it. He may experience pain, but lack the words to express it. The challenge is not that he doesn't care, but that he has never been taught how to navigate emotional depth in a way that strengthens rather than threatens his sense of identity. Women who encounter this behavior may find themselves feeling emotionally starved, longing for deeper connection, but facing walls that seem impossible to break down. Ego is often mistaken for confidence, but in reality, it can be a fragile shield that hides deep insecurities. Many men tie their sense of self-worth to external achievements, status, career success, or how they are perceived by others. While confidence is built on self-awareness and growth, ego resists change and protects itself at all costs. When a man prioritizes his ego over growth, he may reject feedback, avoid self-reflection, and resist admitting mistakes, fearing that doing so will make him appear weak. This resistance to growth can create barriers in relationships. Instead of embracing challenges as opportunities to improve, he may become defensive when his flaws are pointed out. If a woman expresses concerns about his actions or emotions, he might deflect responsibility, shift blame, or even dismiss her feelings altogether. His need to always appear strong or right prevents him from seeing the value in emotional intelligence, self-improvement, or deep personal connection. Men who operate from ego often struggle with vulnerability. They may see asking for help as a weakness rather than a strength. When faced with emotional situations, they might respond with pride or stubbornness instead of honesty and introspection. This behavior not only stunts their own growth, but also creates tension in relationships, making emotional intimacy difficult. Over time, this pattern of prioritizing ego over personal evolution can lead to stagnation. A man unwilling to acknowledge his shortcomings or embrace growth will eventually limit himself, both personally and in his relationships. When a woman recognizes this dynamic, she may find herself in a situation where emotional depth, accountability, and genuine connection feel out of reach. Instead of evolving together, she is left navigating around an ego that refuses to bend. Commitment is more than just choosing to be with someone. It requires emotional investment, vulnerability, and a willingness to grow alongside another person. Fear of commitment can manifest in different ways. Some men avoid defining relationships, keeping things vague to maintain a sense of control. They may say they care but hesitate to take steps that solidify emotional security. Others engage deeply at first but withdraw when things become too serious, as if emotional closeness triggers an internal alarm. This pattern creates confusion for women who may feel an emotional connection yet sense resistance when it comes to long-term stability. At the core of this fear is often a deep-seated worry about losing freedom or identity. A man may see commitment as a trap rather than a foundation for growth. He may fear being emotionally dependent on someone else, believing that love makes him vulnerable to pain or disappointment. If he has past experiences of betrayal, heartbreak, or instability, he might unconsciously sabotage new relationships to avoid repeating those wounds. Rather than acknowledging these fears, some men mask them with excuses. They're too busy, not ready, or still figuring things out. While these reasons may seem logical, they often serve as a cover for an internal struggle with emotional depth and security. In relationships, this uncertainty can create cycles of push and pull, where a woman is given just enough attention to stay hopeful, but never enough stability to feel truly safe. Validation is a fundamental human need, but for some men, it becomes a driving force that dictates their self-worth. Rather than building confidence from within, they rely on external approval, whether from women, peers, or society, to feel valued. This dependency on validation can create instability in relationships because their sense of self is not rooted in personal growth, but in how others perceive them. In personal growth, but in how others perceive them. A man who seeks validation constantly craves reassurance. He may need frequent compliments, admiration, or attention to feel secure. If he doesn't receive it, he might become distant, moody, or even seek attention elsewhere. His actions are often guided by how they will be received, rather than by genuine intention. Instead of acting out of integrity, he may shape his behavior to gain praise, avoid criticism, or maintain an image of success. This dependence can also lead to inconsistency. If a man's confidence is tied to external sources, he might shift his personality or values depending on his environment. Around friends, he may present himself as independent and self-sufficient, yet in a relationship, he might become overly needy or reactive when he feels unappreciated. His emotional state is dictated by how much validation he receives, making stability in a relationship difficult. For women, this can be exhausting. A man who constantly seeks validation may unintentionally place the burden of his self-worth on his partner. She may find herself in a cycle of constantly reassuring him, walking on eggshells to avoid wounding his fragile ego, or competing with external influences for his attention. Over time, this dynamic can drain emotional energy, turning what should be a partnership into a one-sided effort to keep him emotionally satisfied. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage one's emotions, while also being attuned to the emotions of others. Many men, however, struggle with this skill because they were never taught how to process or express feelings in a healthy way. Instead, they are often conditioned to prioritize logic, problem-solving, and control, leaving little room for emotional awareness. This lack of emotional intelligence can create disconnects in relationships, making it difficult for them to build deep, meaningful connections. A man with low emotional intelligence may struggle to identify his own emotions, let alone articulate them. He might feel anger but not recognize the sadness or fear beneath it. He might experience stress but dismiss it as simply being tired or frustrated. Without emotional awareness, he may react impulsively, withdrawing when overwhelmed or shutting down difficult conversations instead of working through them. This lack of emotional depth also affects how he responds to his partner's feelings. If a woman expresses sadness, frustration, or disappointment, he may struggle to empathize, dismissing her emotions as overreactions or things that don't make sense to him. Instead of offering comfort or support, he might try to fix the problem logically, not realizing that what she truly needs is understanding and emotional presence. In conflict, emotional intelligence plays a crucial role. A man who lacks it may struggle to take accountability for his actions, resort to defensiveness, or avoid difficult conversations altogether. Rather than listening to understand, he listens to respond or justify himself. Over time, this inability to engage emotionally can create frustration and distance, leaving his partner feeling unheard, unsupported, and emotionally unfulfilled. Control is often mistaken for leadership, but in many cases it is actually a defense mechanism rooted in fear. Some men use control to maintain a sense of power in their relationships, not because they are naturally dominant, but because they fear vulnerability, uncertainty, or losing a sense of authority. This need for control can manifest in different ways, emotionally, mentally, or even physically, creating an unbalanced dynamic that leaves little room for true partnership. A man who relies on control may struggle with trust. He might feel the need to dictate decisions, influence how his partner behaves, or set unspoken rules that benefit his own sense of security. This behavior is not always obvious. Sometimes it comes in subtle forms, like making his partner feel guilty for independent choices, questioning her judgment, or needing constant reassurance that he is in charge. The more control he has, the safer he feels, but at the cost of his partner's emotional freedom. This mindset is often rooted in personal insecurities. A man who lacks confidence in himself may compensate by controlling his environment, believing that if he dictates the terms of a relationship, he can avoid disappointment or rejection. Rather than addressing his fears openly, he masks them through dominance, possessiveness, or emotional withdrawal when things don't go his way. For a woman, this dynamic can be emotionally draining. She may start to feel like she has to walk on eggshells, constantly adjusting her actions to avoid conflict. Over time, this imbalance can erode her sense of self, making her question her own needs, decisions, and desires. What begins as subtle control can eventually turn into emotional suffocation, limiting her ability to express herself freely in the relationship. Unhealed past trauma is a powerful force that often operates beneath the surface, influencing a man's actions and reactions without his conscious awareness. These experiences, whether from childhood, past relationships, or life events, shape the way he perceives the world and interacts with others. If left unaddressed, this trauma can manifest in patterns of behavior that negatively impact relationships, including emotional withdrawal, mistrust, and fear of vulnerability. For some men, past trauma can create walls around their emotions. They may avoid getting too close to others, fearing that intimacy will expose their pain. Their past experiences may have taught them that love leads to hurt, so they subconsciously keep their partners at arm's length, despite feeling a desire for connection. This emotional distancing can lead to confusion for the woman in the relationship, who might wonder why her partner is emotionally unavailable or resistant to fully engaging. A man who has experienced betrayal or emotional neglect may also struggle with trust. Even in a loving relationship, he may constantly question his partner's intentions, projecting his past experiences onto her. He may overreact to situations, becoming defensive or angry when he perceives rejection or disloyalty, even when there is no evidence to support these fears. Unhealed trauma also impacts a man's ability to communicate openly. He might find it difficult to talk about his feelings, especially if doing so brings up painful memories. Instead of addressing his emotional needs, he may shut down, resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms like substance abuse, anger, or avoidance. This cycle of unaddressed pain creates tension in relationships, as his partner may feel rejected, unsupported, or unsure of how to help him heal. Avoidance of accountability is a common trait among men who are unwilling to confront their own flaws or mistakes. When faced with the need to take responsibility for their actions, some men may deflect, shift blame, or rationalize their behavior to avoid feeling guilty, ashamed, or weak. Rather than acknowledging their role in a situation, they may project their shortcomings onto others, making it difficult to resolve conflict or grow from mistakes. This avoidance can take many forms. A man may make excuses for his actions, such as blaming external circumstances or other people for his behavior. Instead of owning up to his mistakes, he may create distractions, diverting attention away from the issue at hand. In more extreme cases, he might even deny any wrongdoing, refusing to see how his actions have hurt or impacted others. The inability to take accountability can create a toxic cycle in relationships. A woman who constantly has to bear the emotional weight of a situation without receiving an apology or acknowledgement of the problem may feel frustrated, unheard, and undervalued. Over time, this can erode trust and undermine the emotional connection as the woman begins to question whether her partner is truly committed to the relationship or to personal growth. This pattern of avoidance often stems from deep-rooted fear. A man may be afraid that acknowledging his mistakes will make him seem weak, unworthy, or incapable. He might worry that facing the truth will expose vulnerabilities that he's not prepared to address. But the inability to take accountability only perpetuates emotional distance and creates an imbalance in the relationship, where one partner carries the emotional burden of unresolved issues, preventing the compartmentalization is a coping mechanism that allows a man to separate different aspects of his life, emotions, relationships, work, or personal identity, in an attempt to maintain control or avoid dealing with difficult feelings. While this strategy can sometimes help manage stress, it often leads to emotional disconnect, as he may suppress feelings that don't fit into his predefined compartments. This detachment can result in him appearing distant or indifferent in certain situations, even when he deeply cares or is affected by what's happening around him. For example, a man may be deeply engaged and focused at work, but emotionally distant or detached in his personal life. He may put on a mask of professionalism or strength during the day, only to shut down emotionally when he gets home. In relationships, this can leave his partner feeling isolated, as they may sense that he is physically present, but emotionally unavailable. He may struggle to bring personal issues into conversations, often brushing them off or dismissing them as unrelated to his work or daily responsibilities. This emotional compartmentalization can create tension when different areas of life begin to overlap. When a man's work stress or personal problems seep into his relationship, but he refuses to acknowledge them, it can create confusion or resentment. His partner might feel like she is being excluded from important parts of his emotional world, or worse, that she is not trusted enough to be included. Over time, compartmentalization can prevent the growth of intimacy in a relationship. The lack of emotional openness limits genuine connection, as both partners feel they are navigating separate lives instead of sharing one. It can also cause internal conflict for the man, as he suppresses his emotions and struggles to reconcile different parts of his identity. Resistance to change is often rooted in fear, uncertainty, and a desire to preserve a sense of control or stability. For some men, change represents a loss of identity, a challenge to the way they see themselves or the world around them. The fear of the unknown can be paralyzing, causing them to hold tightly to old habits, beliefs, or behaviors, even when those patterns no longer serve them or their relationships. This resistance can manifest in various ways. A man might refuse to adapt to new circumstances, whether it's changes in a relationship, personal growth, or shifting responsibilities. He may be reluctant to change old thought patterns, such as avoiding emotional expression, because confronting new ideas or ways of being feels too vulnerable or uncomfortable. Instead of embracing growth, he may dig in his heels, clinging to outdated ways of thinking that offer false comfort. In relationships, this resistance to change can cause friction, as his partner may feel that progress is impossible. When a woman suggests new ways of improving the relationship or addressing issues, a man who resists change may reject the idea entirely or minimize the importance of change. This can lead to stagnation, as emotional or behavioral growth becomes sidelined. Over time, resistance to change can limit a man's potential. He may miss out on opportunities for self-improvement or deeper connection because he is unwilling to embrace vulnerability or face discomfort. This fear of change often stems from a desire to protect one's sense of self, but in doing so, it can prevent the development of a more fulfilling and authentic life, both individually and within a relationship. In conclusion, understanding male weakness is not about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about recognizing patterns that, when left unchecked, can hinder personal growth and the strength of relationships. By acknowledging emotional avoidance, the fragility of ego, the fear of commitment, the need for external validation, the lack of emotional intelligence, the drive for control, unhealed trauma, avoidance of accountability, compartmentalization, and resistance to change, we gain insight into the underlying struggles many men face. But awareness is only the first step. It's not enough to simply recognize these weaknesses. The real power comes from taking action, from choosing to confront fears, break down walls, and embrace vulnerability. For women, understanding these challenges gives you the tools to navigate relationships with empathy, patience, and a clear sense of your own worth. In the end, both men and women deserve to be in relationships where growth, honesty, and emotional connection are the foundation. By acknowledging these weaknesses, we can create an environment where both partners feel empowered to evolve, support one another, and build a partnership that is not defined by fear, but strengthened by understanding and mutual respect.